All right, Mystery Jeep Shop here once again. This poor thing, it's been doing really good, and then recently it started making some engine noises, and it got louder a few weeks back when we were cruising pretty easy up and down the Blue Ridge Parkway. The noise just started being noticeable and then started getting louder the hotter the engine got. Wife thinks it's because I had all four wheels locked and tried to pull the truck out of a ditch uphill. She might be right. I don't know. But admittedly, this thing has been overheated twice in my ownership. You can see that heater line right there, how I've got it zip tied down. But when I bought it, that was much higher than the radiator. So I guarantee that whoever worked on it and owned it before me overheated it before I did. So I resolved that, obviously, but then I had the fan before I put this thing on here, the automatic switch. Had the fan on a manual switch, and yeah, crawling in low 1 through rocky terrain. I forgot to turn it on. Smelled coolant, turned it on, looked at the temp, and it was up there. I don't remember what it was at. I guess it was 230, 260, hot, especially for such an old engine. Anyway, started making noise. So dropped the oil and pulled the filter out, cut the filter open. Didn't see anything really big in the filter, maybe a couple of specks of like chunks of bearing that came off, but it's really hard to tell with how small they were. They weren't obvious. And then I dumped the oil out of there and just kind of, well, you'll see it. I'll add it right now. It looked like copper in there. Panning for gold. So yeah, there is copper in the oil. So I dropped the pan and started pulling rod bearing caps off. One looked pretty good. It did have some foreign object scratches all the way through it. 2 and 3 looked better. 4 was the problem. Look at how it's curling away. So I suspect it got overheated and lost its spring tension and started curling in, and that was kind of its demise. I also found a fuel pump drive lever loose in the oil pan that I guess was just left there, and they replaced the fuel pump. But anyway, bearing is bad. Cylinder number 4 also is low on compression, so maybe the rings lost tension from being overheated too. And it's always been low on compression ever since I bought it. Obviously, me overheating it didn't help anything, and this is probably just inevitable. All of the rod bearings had no spring tension. You could just turn the caps over, they would fall right out. There's nothing retaining them into that bottom cup. So surprisingly, oil pressure was good. Valve lash was good. I didn't check cam lift. Yeah, we did check the filter for metal. The pan, what's the use? We found metal there, and it failed the rod bearing test. So I can just throw this away now. Next thing I want to do is run a leak down on cylinder number 4 to see if I can identify where the air is escaping, if it's through the rings or if it's through an exhaust valve, because where I'm at now is, I'm juggling, do I want to do a refresh on this, not necessarily a rebuild, because the cam looks good. The bottom side of the pistons look good. The cylinder walls look okay. I would show you, but I misplaced my flashlight. I think it's under the hood. So I'll find it here in a little bit. But yeah, everything else looks pretty good. But obviously there's metal and all through the oil journals. So the right thing to do would be to put new main bearings in it, new rod bearings in it. Pretend that the cam bearings are good. Hone it, new rings, and seal it up. This gasket had no RTV on it, so I think might be the first time the pan's ever been taken off. And honestly, it's not too bad in there. Yeah, there's a little bit of sludge on the bottom, but it's a flat tap engine, so that's what they do. Aside from it overheating, I think this thing would have just kept on going. So that's where I'm at. I cannot find my compression tester gauge, which has the air fitting adapter to go into the spark plug hole. Cannot find it. Got a new toolbox, and so tools got rearranged. And then obviously, everything else is so well organized. I mean, I can't even find a flashlight. Other option is an Iron Duke, but not this one. I got it for $50 and then took it home and quickly realized why. Rust in cylinders 3 and 4. It was seized, so I got it freed up, not pretty easily, but rod bearing number 1 was a razor blade. It sliced my finger there. Piston was hitting the head. It was so bad. And it undersized the crank, which means it probably, since this was rubbing on the crank to undersize it, this is probably now oversized. So I've got a trash piston, which probably could be reconditioned and put back into use, but the rod is trashed, the crank is trashed, the water pump obviously has been sitting outside. Really the only thing that's worth anything on here is the head, which I haven't even checked anything on. I didn't even put fluid in it to see if the valves hold. But I'm assuming it's fine. So head and block are really the only things worth anything on here. Crank, even metal got on the crank lobe, and so the crank had 2 lobes that were chewed up too. So this is not going to happen. I could still potentially buy another one. There's one about 2 hours from me with a bell housing and clutch assembly. Guy wants $500 for it, and his documentation shows that it has well over 200,000 miles. So I feel like his price is really high. I could probably talk him down some, but either way, there's going to be drama associated with any engine swap. Exhaust is not going to line up. That's not too big of a deal. You just weld some pipes. Carburetor is not going to line up to this EFI port. That's probably the biggest deal, is figuring out a new adapter to get a Weber on here. Hood clearance is potentially an issue. And then pedal clearance, I don't know if that's an issue or not. So, and then motor mounts, obviously. So all of those are good reasons to just freshen this up. It would be much less expensive if all it needs is bearings and rings in the gasket kit. So I guess I'm going to proceed with that. But I want to pressure test it because my only fear here is I don't have any tools for exhaust valve springs, so I can't even check valve seal on the exhaust side. So my idea here is I want to just leave the exhaust valve springs in the motor and leave the cam in the motor and just do a refresh and just a ball hone on the cylinder walls, as long as nothing stupid happened in there and there's not like a wrist pin digging into the cylinder wall or something like that, which I doubt that anything like that's going on, because the compression in number 4, it was still building compression in number 4. It was just down. I don't remember exactly what the numbers were, but number 4 was a good something like 20 psi lower, just going off of old man memory. So I'm going to keep looking around for my compression tester and then probably pull the grill and the radiator out and pluck that engine off and throw this one aside so I can put the F-head on here. Knew I should have looked in this drawer first. All right, I hooked up air, removed the Schrader valve from this compression tester adapter. And you can hear it hissing, and it's not even 20 psi. It does not sound like it's coming out of the intake. The carburetor's off, so you'd be able to hear that. changed whenever I move the carburetor around. Does not sound like it's coming out of the exhaust. Oil pan is off, so it's not like I can remove the dipstick, but I'm gonna say, yeah, that's definitely where we're hearing it escape, is past the rings. So, yes, it would not make a whole lot of sense for me to just slip new rod bearings in and act like everything else is fine. I need to pull the head off, hone it, which I would do in frame, but I'm afraid that the main bearings are contaminated, and that rear main is what houses the rear main seal, so there's no way that I can do anything about that without disconnecting it from the transmission. And if I'm doing that, there's no way I'm messing with the rear main seal in the car. It's going to be there and upside down. Another hack solution would be put 3 main bearings or 2 main bearings in it, leave rear main seal and rear main bearing as it is, slip new rod bearings in it, hone it in frame, and slip new rings in it. And then, obviously a gasket set. But considering the heat obviously is against the transmission and the firewall, because that's the bearing that got wasted, those are the rings that got wasted, acting like the rear main bearing is going to be good enough would be irresponsible. And when main bearings go, they don't really rattle to let you know like a rod bearing does. They just spin and trash the crank. So again, the responsible thing is to get this thing out. Originally I said I was going to remove the radiator. Yes, I will be doing that. My idea was probably remove this one fender. It needs to be repaired anyhow. And the brake fluid has melted the paint off. So it needs some love. So I was going to remove this fender, unbolt the grill and remove the grill. And then I realized that the grill is riveted on, which is not too big of a deal, but I boxed the frame in. So even if I drilled the rivets out, I would have to drill a hole in the bottom of the frame to get a nut and bolt the grill back in place. So the other option would be to pull the engine and leave the grill in place and just get the radiator out. But that engine would have to come up very high. I could remove the tires and set the entire car probably 5 inches lower, because I could just remove the insert from the jack stands and set the arms directly on the lower portion of the jack stands. And that looks like 5 inches. So, yeah, 5 inches, basically that top third of the headlight, which is still a pretty high lift, but I think the hoist would make it, and I guess that's what I'm going to do. So that's probably where I'm going to end it off. Obviously, I've got a lot of work to do, and no point in me setting this thing up to have y'all watch me. I don't do time lapse or any of that. So yeah, the 2 or 3 people that are going to watch this video, I'm going to end it here. Usually I, give a thumbs up and stuff, but I'm feeling a little bummed about the old F-head here. I'm a little unsure about the direction. I just don't feel good about doing a refresh on it for some reason. I don't have an exhaust valve tool. That's probably why. So I can't really even inspect the tappets to see if they're good. I guess that's what I should do next before I go pulling everything out, is mark. Well, they've already got the little mark on them. But basically just turn the engine over and make sure that the push rods are all spinning, and down there that the little flat parts on the lifters are all spinning. And that could give me a good indication of the health of the valve train. So maybe I'll do that next, just to try to make myself feel better. about doing a half-ass refresh. All right, ending it off. Thanks for watching. The petcock was clogged with rust, so I had the brilliant idea of hooking up air compressor, sticking it up to the petcock, and just blast it to push the rust out of the way. And it worked. Of course, I was right there, so I took a shower.